Well, it's very nice to be with this group, and I just love my other panelists, and I think it's been a great introduction to the issues, and I wanted to focus more on U.S. policy. Actually, if you don't mind, I'll stand so I can see somebody in the back there. My relationship to Egypt really came through my relationship to Gaza, because the only way we could get into Gaza was through Egypt. So under Mubarak, we went to Gaza. Under Morsi, we went to Gaza. I happened to be in Egypt when the revolution was taking place on my way to Gaza and said, well, wait, I think I'm going to stop and stay for this revolution. And it was the most exciting experience of my life to see Egyptians coming out and feeling for the first time in their lives so proud to be Egyptian. And the beauty of a people rising up to overthrow a dictatorship is something we don't often get a chance to see, much less participate in, which makes the tragedy of today all the more tragic. My brush with the Sisi regime was very personal, because I was trying to get to Gaza once again with 100 women for International Women's Day. Now, one would think that was a positive thing to do, to show our solidarity for the women in Gaza. And yet, when I arrived at the airport in March, thinking, oh, I was just going to breeze through security, they looked at my passport and said, come with me, kept me hours, finally threw me in a detention center, never told me what I was doing wrong, why I was being treated like that, until they came in 17 hours later, threw me on the ground, pushed their knees on top of me, went to put handcuffs on me so violently that my arm popped out of its socket, and when I was screaming out in pain, they took my scarf and stuffed it into my mouth, dragged me through the airport. The airline said she can't get on a plane, she has to go to the hospital. They wouldn't allow me to go to a hospital, threw me on a plane back to the first plane leaving, which was to Turkey. This was the way the Sisi regime treated a woman, American, going on a peace delegation to Gaza. And of course, it made me want to know more about how this regime was treating its own people. And that's how I became involved with many of the people here, which has been such a wonderful experience, and I feel like family with many of you. Sometimes we joke, because I'm a Jewish, secular head of a women's organization, and I say I would have never voted for the Muslim Brotherhood if I were Egyptian. And yet, I will do whatever I can to defend the rights of people, whether they are Muslim Brotherhood or secular or journalists or whatever they are. And that's really what this is about. It's about basic human rights. And it makes my blood boil to see what my government is doing. Because when there is a coup, the world should speak out and call a coup a coup. That's right. And the U.S. government refused to call the coup a coup. Now, that was very deliberate, because if you call a coup, there's a law that's supposed to be put in place. It's called the Leahy Law, and it says that when a government comes to power through military means, overthrowing a democratically elected government, the U.S. must cut off ties with that government. It means the U.S. cannot be giving any more money to that government. It means the $1.3 billion that the U.S. had been giving to Egypt every year should be cut off. But that has not happened. And the U.S. had another chance to denounce this regime, which was during the elections, when Sisi put himself forward as a leader that was going to allow for democratic elections. Many of the world's most prestigious groups that monitor elections says, we're not going to even bother going to Egypt to monitor those elections because the conditions are not there for free and fair elections. And the ones who did go, most of them came out saying, this was not free and fair elections. And you know, the proof is in the pudding. Look at the results. 96% of the votes to General Sisi? I don't think so. So the conditions were not there for free and fair elections. The U.S. should have said, we do not recognize these elections. We do not recognize Sisi as president. Did they do that? No. Instead, Yes, they made some murmurings about we'd like to see some human rights improvement, but basically congratulated Sisi and said, this is a government that we have many mutual interests with, and we want to move ahead in this strategic relationship. John Kerry, Secretary of State, has been to visit with Sisi. In fact, the first time he went to visit with Sisi, he said that we had released hundreds of millions of dollars already to this government, and that he was sure that we would be able to release the entire amount. That is another $575 million that hadn't been released. Now, keep in mind that when Kerry was there, it was just at the time when the courts in Egypt were giving out these death sentences in sham trials, and the day after Kerry left was when they sentenced the Al Jazeera journalist to between 7 and 10 years in prison. When Sisi came to the United Nations in September, he had a chance to meet with Obama, another photo op, basically giving the stamp of approval of the US government to Sisi's regime. So one has to ask, why is it that the US is carrying on with business as usual, basically, with this regime? And there are a number of reasons. One is that since the signing of the Camp David Accords, Egypt has been used by the United States to, quote, keep peace with Israel, which is really another way of saying, get Egypt's complicity for the oppression of the Palestinian people. And Egypt has been very directly involved in that, especially because one of the only entrances to Gaza is through Egypt, the other through Israel. And now we see with the Sisi government, the most repression along that border, actually the closing of that border for weeks on end, thousands of people on both sides trying to get through, people dying trying to get through from Gaza into Egypt, but the Egyptian government sealing that border. Of 166 major U.S. businesses that went to Egypt, again to say we are excited about the business opportunities in Egypt. Other areas where the U.S. Sees that it has mutual interests with Egypt is actually around the aid itself. The $1.3 billion given to Egypt is really a subsidy. Another area where the U.S. sees mutual interest is, quote, stability. And now we see John Kerry incorporating Egypt into the Muslim countries that are part of the coalition to fight ISIS. And John Kerry has said that Egypt is absolutely essential in the fight against ISIS. And I would say, given what we have heard today and the repression in the Egyptian government, it actually is creating the conditions for more extremism. Because when people don't have legitimate, non-violent outlets for their legitimate grievances, many of them will resort to violence. And so it is the very regime of Sisi that is opening up the space for much of the violence that we're starting to see in Egypt today. Egypt should not be part of any coalition to fight extremism. The Egyptian government itself is an extremist government. So that leads us to say that it is us, the American people, that have to be the ones that are in solidarity with the people in Egypt. It is us, the American people, that have to be putting our pressure on our government to do more, to cut its ties with the Egyptian regime, to stop giving our tax dollars to the Egyptian regime, to actually put sanctions on this government as it puts sanctions on other governments. There should be sanctions on the leaders and the people who are responsible for the Rabaa massacre and all the other human rights abuses. Their assets in the West should be frozen. They should not be allowed to travel to the United States. Sisi should not be allowed to represent Egypt at the United Nations or other international bodies. We should be doing ongoing pressure at Egyptian embassies. We should be bird-dogging Egyptian representatives whenever they come to the United States to speak, quote, on behalf of the Egyptian people. And so my plea to all of you is to get more involved, to learn more about this, and to join the movements that are working to put the pressure on the US government, because this is one of the only ways that we can put the pressure on the Egyptian government. And in the end, it will be the resilience of the Egyptian people that Omar and Rana talked about. It will be the heroic work of the people on the inside, but they need us on the outside as well. And this regime that came to power through the barrel of the gun has to be overthrown in a non-violent way by the people inside Egypt and those of us around the world who believe in freedom, democracy, and human rights. Thank you.